Hi, this is Krista at The Secret Yarnery. Welcome to How to Crochet for Beginners, class number 6. Today we are going to be learning double crochet. To make your double crochet stitches, your coaster, you will need yarn. I'm using Savor from Ice Yarns. It is a 4 worsted weight acrylic. I'm also using a 6mm hook or a J hook. You can use 2 stitch markers to keep track of your first and last stitches of the row. You'll need a needle for sewing in your ends when we are finished, and you'll need a pair of scissors. So let's get started. We're going to start by making a slip knot. So lay your tail over your non-dominant hand, hold it down and wrap it around 2 fingers, making a little bit of an X, and just poke that working yarn underneath the loop around your fingers, pull it up and shrink it down. And now we're going to chain 10. So holding your tail right underneath your slip knot that you just made, push your hook onto your working yarn, underneath, tip it up, turn, and bring it through that loop on your hook and size it up. So that means push it onto the fat part of your hook. If you want a refresher on how to chain, I will link that in the cards up above, as well as the How to Crochet for Beginners classes in the description box down below. So chain 10. That's 2. Here is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and see how I'm not pulling my yarn? I'm letting those chains be nice and relaxed. There is 8, 9, and 10. If you are a tight crocheter, you could use a larger crochet hook just for your chain. To count your chains, you don't count the knot and you don't count what's on your hook. You just count these little V's in between. So our first V is right on top of our knot, right there. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that is 10 chains. And now we want to grab our 10th chain, the last one we did, just give it a little pinch, and we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, and 3. So that chain 3 gives us the same height as our double crochet. So now we're going to roll our chain to the side. We want to look for those back loops. The first back loop is right underneath our working yarn, hiding down in there. So that is our first loop down in there. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Those are the chains we just made. And here is the 4th chain. We want to go into the 4th chain, or the 4th back loop. So wrap your yarn and into that 4th chain with that 4th back loop. Just slide it onto your hook. Grab your yarn and bring it through. Slide all those loops back up onto your fat part of your crochet hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook so it's facing towards you, and just take off 2 loops. 1 and 2. Now size everything back up on the fat part of your hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook so it's facing towards you, that hooky bit, and slide it through the last 2 loops. So that is your first double crochet. Pull a loop up to get that hook out of our way so we can see that first stitch we just did. Right here, that's our first double crochet, and we want to put a stitch marker there. So pop a stitch marker into that stitch underneath both strands of that V, and put your hook back on, shrink down that loop, and we are ready to look for our next camel bump. So put your thumb on the pretty side of those V's and just kind of roll it to the side. Then you'll be able to see our camel bumps. So 1, 2, 3 are the next ones. We're going to go into the next camel bump, or the next back loop right here. So wrap your yarn and into that next stitch, just slide that loop onto your hook. If it is hard to get your hook through, you might have chained too tightly, so you might want to go back and chain with a larger hook, just for those first 10 chains. So grab your yarn and bring it back. Make all your loops the same size on the fat part of your hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook so it's facing towards you, and take off the first 2 loops. Make everything big again on the fat part of your hook. wrap your yarn, turn your hook, and take off 2. So that's our second double crochet. Wrap your yarn, look for that next back loop, which is right here. I'm going to go into that back loop, slide it onto your hook, bring your yarn back through, make everything big on the fat part of your hook, grab your yarn, turn your hook so it's facing down, and slide it through those first 2 loops. Make everything big again, grab your yarn, and take off the last 2 loops. Just like that. So I'll show you what that looks like in slow motion. Now we're at the end of our row. We have 1 chain left. So we can see our knot is right here and our back loop is waiting for us right there. So that's going to be where we put our last double crochet. So wrap your yarn and into that last back loop. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Size all your loops up on the fat part of your hook. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. So that is our last double crochet of the row. So we're going to mark that with a stitch marker, pull a loop up, just kind of hold it out of the way, get your hook out of there too. And we're going to look for this last stitch, the one we just made right now. So right here, and we're just going to pop our stitch marker in and snap it shut. And now we can count our stitches. So our chain does not count for anything in this pattern. Sometimes it will, depending on the pattern you're using. But for this pattern, it doesn't count for anything. So we're just going to be counting these stitches. And half double crochet, you can even count with your fingers. So here's our chain right there. We're not counting it. So we're just going to be counting these actual double crochets that we made. So using your finger and thumb, you can even separate them and just count them like this. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that is what we want. Our chain doesn't count for anything in this pattern. So chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. Slide your hand under your working yarn, grab your work and turn it. And you can see our very first stitch is right where our stitch marker is. So you can take that out now if it's in your way and you know where that stitch is. Wrap your yarn and go into that same stitch. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. So it's a double takeoff. Double crochet is double takeoff. Now we can move that stitch marker up into that stitch that we just made right underneath our hook. Just like that. And now we're going to do 1 double crochet into each stitch all the way along. So each of these little kind of dimples here is a stitch. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way along. Each one of these little dimples gets a double crochet. So wrap your yarn and into the next stitch right here. 1 double crochet. Wrap your yarn, and you can look what I'm doing with my fingers. I'm really moving my fingers forward and back. I'm holding right where I'm crocheting, and then I'm moving them back to see that next stitch, but I'm leaving my finger behind, so I have somewhere to push my hook onto. So into that next stitch, I'm pushing right onto my finger. grab your yarn and bring it back. And now I'm going to move my fingers holding right underneath that stitch, right where my working yarn is coming from. So my working yarn is this yarn right here, and I'm holding right underneath it to keep that stitch in all my work nice and tidy. So grab your yarn, turn your hook, take off 2. I'm moving my fingers again to hold higher up, right underneath that working yarn, sizing your loops, turning your hook and taking off 2. Sizing your loop, wrapping your yarn, looking for that next dimple right there, that next stitch. Put your hook in onto your finger, move your finger out of the way, grab your yarn and bring it through. Move your hands, you're holding right underneath that stitch. Size your loops, wrap your yarn, take off 2, wrap your yarn, and take off 2, just like that. So now I'll show you what that looks like in slow motion. Of your row, we have our last double crochet to work into. So we're ignoring our chains. So wrap your yarn and into that same stitch as your stitch marker. Bring your yarn back, wrap your yarn, taking off 2, wrapping your yarn and taking off 2. So that is our last double crochet of the row. You can move your stitch marker up just into that stitch underneath our hook. The last one we made, right there. And that finishes our second row of double crochet. So chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. Slide your hand under your working yarn, grabbing your work and turning it. And now wrap your yarn. We're going to go into that very first stitch like we did before. You can move that stitch marker out of the way if it's bothering you. And wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2. And now we want to move that stitch marker up right underneath our working yarn. So we want to go right into this stitch here, the top of that real double crochet. And we're ignoring our chain. That's just to give us some height. So wrap your yarn, and now we're going to go into every stitch, making 1 double crochet, same as the last row. So our next stitch is right here, and then here, here, here. We're just going to be going into the stitch in between these little bits of yarn, like little dimples. So we're going to go 1 double crochet into each of these spots all the way along. At the end of our row, we have our stitch marker. If you are not using stitch markers, it is this last little stitch on the hill. So it's a little slopey bit right here, and that is our stitch. We're going to go right into that stitch right there. So wrap your yarn and into that stitch, your last double crochet of the row. Chain 3 to get your height. 1, 2, and 3. Slide your hand under your working yarn, turn your work, and if you're not using stitch markers again, it is this little stitch right here along the edge. That is your first stitch. So wrap your yarn and into the first stitch, your first double crochet, just like that. And now you can pause the video and keep working along. You want to do 6 rows of double crochet. So to count your double crochet, there is 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5 rows, and 6 rows. So when you've completed your 6 rows, chain 1, like we always do when we finish our work. Cut your yarn, leaving a long enough tail to sew in with a needle later. pull your hook up and your yarn through and snug that down to secure. Sew in your tails and you're finished. If you don't want these big loops going along the side, those are your chain 3s. You can do your double crochet coaster with just a chain 2. That'll keep it a lot more straight on your edges, but I wanted to teach you the chain 3 with your double crochet to start, because that is what you'll be seeing with lots of patterns. A chain 3 counts as the same height as a double crochet in most patterns, so that's why I wanted you to just associate those two together with your very first coaster. If you're making more, you can substitute a chain 2, or you can even just pull up a loop and do a super big chain 1 to turn. But we're going to be doing that in a separate class coming up on how to keep a straight edge. So I hope you enjoyed this class as much as I did, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of them. There is a link to the playlist for the classes in the description box down below. If you haven't joined or subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit those links in the description box down below. There's also links of where to find me on social media. I'd love to see how your coasters turned out. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next class. Stay hooked.